and a very few knew. And so I was explaining that, particularly to the young people. The North and the South were divided by an imaginary line called the Mason-Dixon line. And all of the states south of the Mason-Dixon line were in the South, and those north of the Mason-Dixon line was in the North. Now that does not mean that we only had segregation in the South, because we had segregation all over the country. It was shown in different ways wherever you went. I remember when we went overseas and we were fighting in Italy, we all became friends. The white bomber pilots that we escorted, when they saw us in town, we were their friends. We partied together, we buddied together, and we were together the whole time until we got off the boat in New York City. And as we were walking down the gangplank, they had signs at the bottom, white to the right or left and color to the other side. We knew we were back home. We had a lot of our pilots that flew multiple missions, tours, because they didn't want to come back to segregation. We had some people that stayed over there after the war. I know when we were stationed in France in the 60s, one of the guys that got out of the service and moved to Paris because he didn't want to come back to segregation in this country. We've gone a long ways.
Hold it.
Yes, sir.
We'll have to cut him down now. We've got two more coming in, and as I mentioned earlier, Bill and I have made presentations to the previous group. With a new group that comes in that we have joined us, we'd certainly like to have an exposure from the 4 additional members that we have, Tuskegee Airmen. Right now we have Bill Terry. And
Bill is the guy he was talking about.
I mentioned to some of the folks.
He's our jailbird.
Yeah.
I mentioned to some of the folks before they came in that we did have an incident in which a number of our officers were arrested because they dared to try to go into the White Officers Club in those days when we had white and black, or white and colored actually, on the same base. We had those kinds of facilities. Speaking of white and colored, you probably, for the elders, you know that at one time we were colored people.
Yeah.
Then we became Negroes. Then we became blacks. Right now, I guess the going term is African American. Well, what we like to have everybody realize, and what I'm sure that you appreciate, is we are Americans. And that's the way we like to have it. Bill Ellis is our next young guest here. Bill Ellis happens to be at this time the elder statesman of our group, because he's 90 years old. I happen to be the junior member of the group. I'm 79 years old. We have 2 others who are coming who have experienced being prisoners of war. One has written a book, Alexander Jefferson, which he is, I think, advertising here today. And the other, Dick Macon, hasn't written a book, but I hope they come in because we would like you to have an exposure to a variety here. These guys have something to tell you as well as Bill Holloman I had. So since they're not here yet, why don't we, and if we could just restrict.
Just answer the questions.
Well, or you just want to answer questions?
Answer questions.
Okay, then why don't you pop some questions to these gentlemen?
Do something, don't sit up
Just
here.
raise your hand. Raise your
Don't
hand.
be bashful.
If nobody answers the question, we can go home.
I got a hand.
You might explain to the class what the Tuskegee is all about.
Oh,
What, Tuskegee? Tuskegee is in Alabama. It's a little country city. It was. It's a little more famous now. When it was finally decided that they could not keep us out of the air in World War II, it was a question then of finding a place to send us. Well, originally, when the war in Europe started, the United States started a program, civilian pilot training program. And they had colleges all over the place, you see. And Mr. Truman, as the senator, of course, was the main one who saw to it that we were finally included in this program. So they picked 6 black colleges, Tuskegee happened to have been one of them. Well, Tuskegee is in the south. It had a field. It had a university that's really attached to it, so to speak, and all. So when it was finally decided that we could fly, or they had to decide that we could fly, because we weren't supposed to have sense enough to learn how to fly. We didn't have the mind-muscular coordination to be able to fly. Like one of my buddies, he said he must never seen a basketball game and say we didn't have coordination. So, you see, one of those type of things. And this is basically.
You answered the question.
Next question.
Next question, sir.
Next
I have
one.
a question, yes. Correct me if I'm wrong, but General Davis, Chappie Davis?
No,
was he-
Chappie James.
and
Benjamin O.
James.
Davis.
James, okay. Was he a Tuskegee Airman also?
Tuskegee Airmen, yes.
He was the first
Black
general.
4-star general.
Right.
4-star general.
Right.
He was one of my classmates. 43G, as we say, REDD, 43G.
As an add to that, his son is now a 3-star general, and he's chief of the Air National Guard.
Isn't that right?
Yes, no,
You know, he's chief of the National Guard.
Yeah,
That's the
National
whole
Guard.
thing.
Yeah.
yeah. He was in Texas National Guard, who,
The Texas National Guard.
where our president was supposed to be a member.
And
Next
I remember-
question.
I remember when I get to, we were up at Selfish Field, and he was about yay high, and I used to run him out of the ditches, because Chappie was one of, we were tight. We were not only classmates, but we were in the same squadron, you see. And we took care of the kids. We had a good camaraderie. We came from all over the United States, but when we got together, we found out that really we were just like brothers. We thought a lot alike. We had come out of different schools all over this country. And we had the same kind of feelings about the United States. This is my country.
Bill, let me mention something. You probably have are reminded that there's a lot of talk about the 332nd fighter group being overseas. You probably don't know very much about the 477th Composite Group. And the 477th Composite Group was a group of 3 B-25 squadrons and four B-25 squadrons and 1 squadron of P-47s.
Oh, no,
Which
that
was-
was the composite group.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which was being readied to go to the Far East to fight against the Japanese when the war ended. When I graduated from pilot training, and again I like to brag because I'm the youngest one, I was in the last class, these gentlemen had already gone and fought the war. I was in high school. I graduated in June 1946, and when I reported in to the only operational facility that they had available for blacks at Lockbourne Air Base, we had the 477th Composite Group. At that time, we had the 3 B-25 squadrons and 1 P-47 squadron. I graduated single engine fighter pilot, so I was insulted by having to be assigned to a B-25 squadron. Now,
So,
I was insulted because I was a fighter pilot. See, I thought I should go into a fighter. I was too little to go into a bomber, but I was assigned to the 617th
that's right.
Bomb Squadron, B-25s. I flew with Bill Ellis on a number of occasions.
I
with
changed his mind.
I flew with other outstandingly competent bomber pilots, and they made that B-25 seem like a fighter the way that they flew the thing, because we had a lot of bombing missions and a lot of strafing missions, and by golly, at times
Well, we had been trained as fighter pilots.
I thought I was in a fighter. But I just point out the fact that there was a 477 composite group, there was a 332nd fighter wing, there was a 99th fighter squadron, which started it all. So there's a bit of history that these folks, both these gentlemen were fighter pilots, and plus they were B-25 pilots, so you might want to direct some questions to them in that regard.
I was wondering
Yes,
what-
this lady right here.
I was wondering what
I think so.
kind of planes you trained in, and in your training when you first got to Tuskegee.
We flew the
Did
PT.
anybody in your outfit get killed in training?
Well, we flew the same planes up until advance. When you went to advance, then
What'd you start out in?
PT.
PT, the PT.
Spearmans and
The
Fairchild.
Spearmans, that little thing you see flying around here
Stearman,
sometimes.
the PT-17 and the PT.
PT 17, then the BT
13.
13, that was a vibrator.
PT 13.
And then when you went twin engine, you'd fly the AT-10, and they flew the AT-6. And then later on, you'd fly the B-25 in advance.
And this was all done at the same airfield, incidentally. At the same airfield, you had single-engine airplanes and you had multi-engine airplanes in the same traffic patterns at the same field.
And you better have your head
Well,
up.
yeah, and you see, the whole thing is the 332nd Fighter Group was comparable to anything in the United States military. Rather than have two groups, which means that B.O. Davis then has to become a general, because he's already a colonel, you see, they decided that they would have a bomber group. Now, you got at the same field, the bomber group has the same number of airplanes, and on top of that, you have twice the pilots, because you have a co-pilot in the main in the bomber. Whereas in a fighter, you just have the one guy, and here you got two. Then you have to train navigators and bombardiers, you see. Then you have to train wing gunners, tail gunners, and these enlisted people, the flight engineers and all of that, which takes up time. And this was a delaying thing. And as a result, the bomb group never got overseas. And it's the best 25 group that they had and the smartest thing that they've ever seen.
Here comes
Hold
Alexander.
it, hold it.
Yeah.
Here comes our two jailbirds.
This gentleman is Alexander Jefferson, and the one following is Dick Macon.
Dick Macon is.
They're dangerous, you have to be careful.
Have a seat down, Uncle Richard.
He does that because he's a boy under me.
Now you can direct some of your questions to them, because both of them had experiences being prisoners of war.
Yeah, see, they,
Excuse me. Someone asked a question earlier about the treatment as prisoners of war. Ellis, would you tell them how you were treated?
As an officer and a gentleman, I was treated better in a German prison camp than I was treated in Mississippi at that time. Because in Mississippi, I was still a boy. It's all part of racism and segregation and discrimination. 9 months in Germany as a POW.
They got shot down the same day.
Tell them about the man when you went to the intelligence office and he just, this is very important. Tell this part. When you don't supposed to, you know, man, name, rank.
Name,
serial.
rank, and serial number.
Tell this.
First of all, the officer who was in charge of the local artillery that actually shot me down, the 20 millimeter guy, when I bailed out and went down through the trees, and the guy says, "Ach so, ja, Leutnant," took me to a little villa about a quarter mile away, and a German officer was sitting at a table right over the Mediterranean. When I walked on the porch, I saw the guy had some stuff on his shoulder, so I knew he was an officer, and I saluted. He said, in perfect English, "Have a seat, Lieutenant." That blew me away. After about 5 or 10 minutes, he was asking Had I ever been to Pittsburgh? I said no. He described Pittsburgh. He said, you ever been to Atlanta? I said no, although I had attended Clark College 4 years. He described how you go downtown Atlanta to Auburn Avenue to the black bars and nightclubs. And I was curious. These Germans are trying to get me to talk. Oh, I didn't know anything in the first place. You got to understand this. I had no idea about the relevance of those radar stations. At that time, radar was brand new. Now you got to understand, this was before ballpoint pens, before LPs, before television. And next thing he said, you ever been to Washington? I said no. I spent a year at Howard University. He knew how to go down on 7th Street. And Howard knew about the theater, Crystal Taverns. Said, meanwhile, I'm still saying no. You know about Detroit? And by that time I said, yeah, because that was my hometown. He said, oh, then you know how to go downtown behind the library and catch the Oakland streetcar to go out, to go through the valley. The valley is where blacks had their jazz nightclubs. He even named the hotel across the street where the girls worked. Turns out the guy had graduated from the University of Michigan in 1936, had gone to Germany, and they put him in charge of this local artillery group. But then when I got to Frankfurt on the Main, the German officer pulled out a big book, and on the front of the book it said 332nd Fighter Group, Negroes, Red Tails. I looked at it, and he opened it up, and he started thumbing through. I see all the pictures of the previous classes that we knew. Finally came on, turned around and said, Lieutenant, isn't that you? There's my graduation class. He knew more about me than I knew about myself. He even had all my schooling, even knew how much taxes my dad paid on his house. After that, we came back and we understood that this is information that you can find out when you go down to the county office. You can find out how much taxes on your house and on everybody else. They knew more about me than I knew about myself. Somebody over here was sending this back to Germany. When we got to Stalag 3, you all saw the movie, The Great Escape. We went into that camp 6 months after those guys went up. 5,000 white officers, because every time a B-17 went down, you lost 4 officers. Pilot, co-pilot, navigator, bombardier. On some of those raids, they lost 50 to 60 B-17s. The enlisted personnel were in a different camp, because through the Geneva Convention that everybody's hearing about today, why don't the Al-Qaeda, these characters, the terrorists, and the great Americans are sitting here Monday morning quarterbacking, and today talking about, oh, they're not treating them right. These prisoners down in Guantanamo Bay, they're not treating them with the Geneva Convention. But the United States, England, and Germany signed the Geneva Convention, which denotes how you treat your prisoners. Japan, Vietnam did not do so. This is why you had the Hanoi Hilton, because their attitude was they're supposed to fight to the death. And if they surrender, they're less than dogs. They should die. See how we Americans have to learn how things happen. Caught hell in Korea, because the Koreans didn't believe in the Geneva Convention either. But we Monday morning quarterbacking back here.
But one of the things you have to realize, there is no way they could have known that Alexander Jefferson was going to get shot down over Yugoslavia that day. And to tell him what they told him simply means that they had it on all of us.
On everybody.
And
On even the white officers, the 5,000 white.
They had it.
They had. Which means
And they didn't. And they knew about the blacks. They knew more about the blacks than the Americans
That's
did.
it.
We ran into a fellow at the boys' prison in California when we were giving our lectures and whatnot, and we were up there, and there was one of the deputies who was running the thing that day. His grandfather had been a gunner on a B-17, and he brought his gun when he told his grandfather that the Tuskegee Airmen were going to be there, and there were two of us, that we'd still run around, all of us would do this. He came in, and he came in to thank us for having saved his life. And we run into this in going through airports. People will say, my father, my granddad, or whatever it is, and this and that. And what had happened in this particular case, this man was a gunner out of 17. And they had been hurt, you know. Well, in bombers, if you got hurt, you might get left, and the fighters don't stay back there to protect you. They go with the group, you see. And he said that they were down low trying to get out of enemy territory and finally get over to friendly territory so they could get rid of this thing because it was really going to fail. And he said, we looked up and saw 4 109s. That's that German top fighter.
give me 109.
The 109. They saw 4 in there, this flight, 4. And he said, we knew we were dead because they down there hurt in this bomber. And he said, suddenly down through that formation came 2 red-tailed 51s. And they knew who was, they didn't know who was in that. But the Germans knew. Now we know that wasn't one of Germany's ace groups, flights out there. But anyway, these people backed away and left the scene. And he said the 2 fighters, they came up on the wing of the bomber, and he said the leader pulled his mask down because you have these oxygen masks, and he said, we saw that they were colored. Didn't even know. You see, the Germans knew.
Have any other questions?
Who was
Yes,
selling
sir.
this out? Who was selling that information out to?
Well, somebody had to sell it to them. There's no question about it. That in the United States had to get. How did they know about a school out of the thousands of schools in this country?
Because the German Bund, B-U-N-D, in Detroit. I know the German Bund was in Detroit, which is a group of German Americans who were parading Heil Hitler before Pearl Harbor. They were here, let's face it. They were here.
Can I cut in quick?
Go ahead.
Dick, would you tell them about your experience when you got shot down? It's very interesting. I mean, unusual. He shouldn't be here.
He should.
Yeah, you should. That's the whole problem.
I have learned how to stay quiet and let my minors do all the talking. So I'm listening, but I usually start off by saying to the audience, ladies and gentlemen, I am glad to be here. And I've never told more of the truth than I've told when I say I'm glad to be here. I wish I could tell you about what happened on the 12th of August in 1944. I don't have the time, but what I will do is to give you just a brief excerpt of what happened on the 12th of August 1944. Most of our missions were escort missions, as they have told you, and we enjoyed escorting because it gave us an opportunity to meet up with Germans flying the same type of aircraft, and we enjoyed outflying them in the air. It was like a football game. It was always a lot of fun to outfly somebody and shoot them down instead of being shot down yourself. And you knew what was going to happen all the time. You were going to shoot them down, even though it didn't happen all the time. But on this particular day, men, we are going to southern France, Southern France? What the hell you mean going to southern France? That's too far away, even for a P-51 to go. And you know, P-51s got into escorting bombers because they could fly all the way to the target and back. But France? Jiminy Christmas. What are you going to do? Well, they got some things there called radar. Radar? Well, we knew that radar was something that you could see people in the dark, or you could see them on the other side of clouds, but you couldn't see them on the other side of mountains. Of course, you understand why that is true now. But in those days, this was top of the heap for science. This radar, okay? So they wanted us to destroy the radar so that they could send George Patton to the south and attract 3 or 4 German armies that wanted to get George Patton, and that would relieve the pressure in the bulge. You guys remember the bulge. And with the pressure relieved in the bulge, we could go ahead and kick Germans' butt and come on back home and call it a victory. That's why we had to go to France, because the guys flying out of England had tried for several days and had gotten the hell shot out of them, because they were using, as a defense, they were using the wall of fire. And you guys who've been in combat know that a wall of fire is just like spraying a water gun or maybe a hose and having your kid run through and not get any water on him. You know that'll never happen. If you go through a wall of fire, when you go through it, you're going to get hit by something. Some might be direct hits, boom! Others might be just a hole in the wing or something like this, but you're going to get hit by something. They were using this. And we go up there and say, well, we're going to fool them. We're going to fly over like we're going somewhere else. They didn't shoot at you if you looked like you were going somewhere else, because they were running out of stuff to wage wars, and they had to save. So when we got down where we could get behind the mountains, we know they couldn't pick us up on the radar, we sneaked back. And ha! Surprise! So we did that. We flew by just like you've seen people who wanted to steal, looking around and whistling and stealing stuff out of the store. But we passed by them like we were going somewhere else. And then we dropped down, and we came back on the deck, and when we got to the mountain, surprise! We were the ones surprised. They turned loose with everything they had. First time I'd ever been in a wall of fire. My buddy over there got hit. Doom! Nothing left but puff of smoke, just like a skeet when you're shooting skeets. That's where it looked. You know your buddy was somewhere in that smoke. You know the first thing you think about? Gee, I'm glad it wasn't me. But you're going 500 miles an hour and you're thinking about 1,000 different things, one right behind the other. You got to get out of here. And then I looked around and I had gone through the wall. And there was several big holes in my right wing. And going 500 miles an hour with your right wing perforated near the body of the airplane, right wing just peeled right off just like a sheet of paper would if you pull on the edge, and it was perforated. If you've ever tried to fly an airplane with one wing, you know how difficult that is. Impossible. My plane flipped over, of course. The wing that was good came over the top. And now here I am going 500 miles an hour. Can't direct the plane anymore. Headed straight into the ground because we were strafing. What do you do in a case like that? You certainly don't get scared. You don't have the time. But you do what you think you've been taught to do. And it all comes naturally with you now because you've been flying long enough so that it comes. Now, I don't know what the hell happened, but I do know I pushed the stick forward. We're upside down, you push the stick forward, it goes up. And I did the other things, unbuckle the oxygen and the gas and all this other stuff. And I don't remember anything else. But what I do remember is something that's very, very strange, and I know it didn't happen, but it passed through my mind. And the psychiatrists say that was an out-of-body experience, but I'll tell you what it was that happened then. Now remember, all of this is happening in very small seconds. I started saying nanoseconds, but very small seconds. I didn't know what a nanosection was. Very small seconds. And I don't know what happened. But an hour later, when I woke up, thinking that I was back at the base, that's what happens when you're unconscious. Looked at my watch. It was an hour after the raid. Now I know that, but at that time I looked at my watch and wondered why in the hell I was still not in bed, I'm on the ground here in a plowed up field. What the hell am I doing on a plowed? Oh, I was shot down. Let me get up and get out of here. All of these things happen to you when something like this does. And so I started to get up. But when I tried to get up, I realized that I was injured. This shoulder was all broken up, and when I tried to get up, the bones just stuck out through the skin. Well, I fell back to the ground, naturally. When I fell back to the ground, I went unconscious again. I went unconscious because I didn't know my neck was broken too. It was broken in many small pieces, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 cervical vertebrae. I didn't know all that then. All I knew was that I was trying to get up and get out of there with my parachute and all that. And I don't know how in the devil I got there in the first place. But when I tried to get up, and when I regained consciousness again, I realized that there were people around me, just standing looking. And I looked up, and 3 of those people were standing right over me with machine pistols. And they were not friendly. With me 3,000, 6,000 miles away from home, and unfriendly people standing over me with machine guns, that's not a good prospect. And the first thing they said to me, "Rausmitten!" I couldn't speak any German, but I knew damn well they were saying, "Get the hell up." But they realized that that was a dumb order because they had seen me trying to get up before, and they saw what happened. So I guess they realized that. They're pretty smart, and they grabbed me by both arms, not realizing that this arm was all torn up, and lifted me up. Of course, I didn't feel it because I was suffering from shock, I guess. And then they found out that I couldn't stand up. My feet and my arms, my legs and feet were just dragging because I was paralyzed from the waist down. So they had to take me to the vehicle, arms around their shoulders like this, and with my feet dragging. Many things go through your mind. I know how much hell it was in Mississippi for the Klan to be doing me like that. I knew what the Klan, the Ku Klux Klan, would probably do if I had done something so bad that they had me as their prisoner. And I thought that Hitler must have taught the Germans how to do much worse. And I thought about the case of a man who was lynched with his feet up and his head down. They removed his genitals and stuck them in his mouth before they cut him down the middle as part of the lynching activity. And all of this goes through your mind. These guys may do something like this to me. So they took me in this vehicle down to what looked like a schoolhouse. And this is where I'm going to have to fight, I said to myself. And they took me out and started up the steps in the schoolhouse. And I started trying to fight with this one arm. You know, it's not much fighting, but it's good to have that attitude rather than giving up. So I started to fight. And they took me in. And here are these 2 guys standing at a hospital bed, one on each side. They had masks on. this is where they're going to remove my genitals. I know that's what they're going to do. So they took me in and slapped me on this table while I was fighting with this one arm that meant nothing to them. And things got quiet. You know what happened, because they anesthetized me and all that other stuff just like this, and I'm gone. When I regained consciousness, I don't know how long that was, my arms were chained to the bed, so I must have given quite a fight. And the guards were standing there with guns, and they saw that I was conscious again, so they took the chains off my hands. And of course, the first thing I did was to check to see if this horrible thing had happened to me. And I'm happy to announce, I'm happy to announce that it hadn't. I was still there. I have two daughters, one is 59 and one is 54, to attest to the fact that they were still there. But they took me in, and I was a prisoner there. But after being there for 2 days, they gave me a little French boy to help me because I couldn't get around. I was completely, he had to change my diaper and all of these things because I had no control of my body functions. And parlez-vous français? And we learned, I had 2 years of French, so we were able to communicate with each other, and I was like a big buddy to him. He knew how to help me up and how to sit me up and all of that. And we loved doing these kinds of things. This night, early in the morning, we heard somebody slamming doors. What had happened was, over there they had found out that when my airplane crashed into the chalet that they were using as headquarters, it killed about 40 to 50 Germans who were in there at the time. Now, of course, I knew nothing about this. I don't even know what happened to me. Everybody in my group went back and said I was certainly killed because the way that plane crashed, they knew I was killed. They didn't see the parachute. Now, you know that going 500 miles an hour and not having the benefit of altitude, when does the parachute open? I don't know how it got open. I don't know how I got to the ground. But I'm here to say I'm very thankful that I was there on the ground. But now they found out I was still living. So you know what they wanted to do? They wanted to come and get that blinkety-blink who killed 40 of their buddies. You couldn't blame them for that. So here they are. They coming with their noses open to get me. I didn't know it, but I just heard the slamming. Slamming, slamming. And finally, they opened my door. Ah! They got him. And they started towards me, and the little French boy jumped up to tell them, don't bother him, he's paralyzed. They kicked him out of the way. I mean, kicked. He slid all the way across the floor and slammed against the blackboard. We were in a classroom, slammed against the blackboard. I don't know what happened to him because I couldn't watch him because I couldn't turn my head. They grabbed me and snatched me up, and you know what happened? I became unconscious again, right? Because my neck was broken. They didn't know it. But they knew that they wanted to shoot me in front of all the guys, so they were taking me there. When I regained consciousness, I was in this vehicle, blindfolded, and they were singing war songs, having fun, and I know they must have been enjoying it. And finally, we got to where they were going. They took me out, feet dragging, and took me through a gate with a lot of loud noises, like an inner sanctum gate. You know how some gates open and close. And then I knew I was in a place where there were many people because you could hear them talking. And they took me up elevation to a fence, and they tried to stand me against the fence, and I couldn't stand. And each time they would turn me loose, I'd fall. I'd start to fall, and they would grab me, and I'd be unconscious. And I don't know, they wasted a lot of time like that trying to get me set up for execution. Finally, I decided that I would give them some assistance, get this thing over with. This left leg, I could push a little bit So when they stood me up, I pushed myself against the fence, and I didn't fall this time. And I know they must have hit high fives because they got it now, and they left me. And then the order was given for the execution to come out. They came out, you could hear them, yeah. Hey! You could hear them make the face movement. And then, ready? That means ready. And you heard them say, and the next order is aim, of course. I knew this was it. The next order would take care of me. But that damn fence, the gate opened. And when the gate opened, somebody hollered, Achtung! It's attention in German for you guys. And you heard all the heels hitting. And got real quiet. And pretty soon, there was a loudmouth talking down there. And if you've ever been in the German army, why do I say that? If you've ever been in the German army, you know that the higher rank you have, the louder you can talk. If I'm a captain and you are a private, I can talk to you like this, and you have to whisper to me. And I heard this loudmouth talking. And in the process of talking, he said, Lieutenant Macon. Oh, he's talking about me, now they're going to do something else to me. Okay, so 3 men came up, took my blindfolds off, and took me down to him. And I was, by some miracle, saved from the firing squad, and I went in for interrogation. I'll stop the story there, but there's a lot more to it. It's very interesting. If you have any questions, I'll be very glad to answer them.
Thank you, Richard. You have a question.
Well, I just wondered how many Tuskegee Airmen there were and how long they had this base open, that sort of thing?
The base opened in 1941, and it closed on the 20th of August, 1946. The reason I know so well, I closed it.
Yeah, that's right.
5 years, and how many men were trained there?
There were, our numbers change as we find more information, but we had 929 people put on the American uniform with pilot's wings like these fellows have on. We had 12 who put on service pilot's wings as instructors, and we had 51 who put on Army liaison pilot wings in order to maintain the segregation at the one location. So we did train Army pilots there also.
When it closed then, did you get integrated in with some other
No.
units? No,
Uh,
still
we-
no.
When we left Tuskegee, we went to Lockburn, which is where, in Ohio, Columbus, Ohio, where Bill and Eddie and myself were stationed until integration, which came about, began in 1948, but was completed in 1949. I left first, and then Bill Ellis came along a month or two after me, and Eddie stayed at Lockburn until he closed.
No.
No,
No,
I
I left in
was,
June.
He left in June, and he went to, what group was that?
I went to the 49th Fighter Wing in Japan with another, one of my compatriots from Lockbourne. And when we reported in to the 49th Fighter Wing, of course, you know, the 49th Fighter Group was Richard Bong's outfit, our America's most famous ace. When we reported in, just before we reported in, the base commander had gotten everybody in an assembly to let them know that 2 Negro pilots were coming on board, or 2 Negro officers, and how we were supposed to be treated. And so he invited us into his office when we first got there. And of course, I was a junior first lieutenant then, and my compatriot was an older first lieutenant. And he asked us, he said, "Now, gentlemen," he says, "welcome to Masawa," says, "how would you like to be called?" And so I deferred to the senior, and Jim Harvey, who was with me, he said, "Well, sir, we'd like to be called Lieutenant Drummond and Lieutenant Harvey." Well, that's natural. So he says, well, that's over with. He says, now, we have 3 fighter squadrons here, and it says, they're flying P-51s, which is a recip, and says, we have 1 squadron that's converting to jets. Which squadron would you like to go to? And you know, commanders don't usually ask you what you want to do. They usually tell you. He said, dang, this is a surprise. So we said, well, we want to go to the jet squadron. So we were assigned to the P-80 squadron. And for some unknown reason, before we were starting to fly the P-80, they had to have us shoot landings from the backseat of a T-6, and we couldn't see the connection because the F-80 was a tricycle gear and everything is like driving a car. But in any event, we went to the P-80 squadron, and of course you had to learn through the manual how to fly the airplane. There were no simulators, there was no T-33, and from then on it was thing was up. So that was my portion of leaving Lafayette.
Yeah,
Hold your point, sir.
when that thing closed, he was gone. I was, I was base legal officer when we shut that gate. Gleed and I and a crew. I think there were about 16 of us left there, and we were the last one, because when they integrated, you see, you had a choice. The kids went scattered all over, like they sent them everywhere. Or you could go to school. And there were several of us who decided that we would go to some school. You see, I was a legal officer because we got drafted a lot. You don't draft pilots. You see, we had all volunteered to get in, and we couldn't get in. And after a while, your name comes up on that draft list. It has nothing to do with your flying list. And I got drafted in the infantry. But I knew the man who was a special assistant to the Secretary of War. And I had a conversation before I left Washington to the effect that I was going to mind my own business and blah, blah, blah. But if I ever asked him for help, be sure. And this thing sort of followed you. But we went down, and you could go to school, and a lot of we decided to go to school. So we went to school, and I was down at Keesler in electronics, because that was my background in high school and that type of thing, you see. And when I left there, the reason I got out, it was very simple. When we integrated, they scattered all over or you could go to school, and a lot of people, as I said, there were 14 of us all together who were down there at Keesler. And this was, and from then on, but I decided to get out down there because there was a fellow who lived next to me, he was two months ahead of me. This is a 3-month course. And I came in one day, and he had graduated, he had finished. And he says, Ellis, I think you're a pretty nice fellow. We've been living next to, the shower was like so. I was over here, and he was over there on the other side. And he said, we've been living side by side here, and I've even told my parents about you. And he came out of New Jersey. Well, my parents were living in Asbury. And when I would fly in to Washington from wherever we were stationed, my brother would come and pick me up, and we would go up to Asbury Park. These are weekend things. And then he would bring me back to Bowling in Washington, and I'd go back to our main base, you see. And when I knew he was in Jersey, I started to say, I said, yeah, my brother, because he said he told his mother, and she would like to he said she'd be glad to meet me if I were ever in that thing. And I said, yeah, my brother, and he stopped me. He says, I did not say your brother. See? And I looked at him, and I said, well, my brother is a much nicer person than I am, because I would cut your goddamn guts out. And I went and got out of the military. Shortly, I said, the hell am I going through this crap anymore? I got out to go back to school.
I hate to cut it off, but we've run out of time. You people have some questions?
Yeah.
We'll be up in the restaurant, up in the cafeteria afterwards.
Well, that's just a quick one. In this composite group, did you guys fly jump for the duration?
Yes.
Yeah.
The students have to get to their lunch.
Well, you guys too.
Huh?
We got food for you guys too.
I know, but we got more time than they got. But we'll be glad to answer your questions up there. Thank you.